Hi, I'm Christie Blatchford. I'm the courts columnist for the National Post and Post Media. Every couple of years, maybe every 3 or 4 years, I have to go looking through my books to find the Bible on multiple murderers. And this happened again this morning because there was a shooting in Toronto, a different kind of shooting in that it wasn't, it appears at least, it wasn't a gang shooting. It wasn't, a domestic murder, which so many murders are. He ended up killing two people, and the shooter himself is dead, which is why the investigation's a little more complicated than it might normally be, because in Ontario there's an independent oversight body called the Special Investigations Unit, which comes in whenever the police kill or wound somebody. So the SIU, as it's called, is now investigating, and they have control really of the investigation until they decide what happened and if the force used was justified. And I rather think they will find if this fellow died of a police bullet, it was justified, since he was shooting innocent people who were guilty of nothing more than having a coffee. I was driven to go at my bookshelves to try and find what I consider to be the Bible of multiple murderers. That's the actual proper name for the kind of shooting that happened in Toronto last night. It's written by a Memorial University anthropologist named Elliot Layton, and I think it was written in 1984, something like that, though it's been updated. It remains the most unsentimental and I think cogent look at multiple murderers and the things that tend to drive them. They're all different, of course, but they have some common things. Most of them are white, young, middle-class men, lower middle-class men. They are aspirational. They are very class-conscious, Layton says, and they feel themselves to be a victim. They are underachievers. They envy the class just above them, which is a weird kind of way to look at it in America, North America, because we think that we're not a class system, but we are pretty much a classist system. Often these shooters, they're unlike serial killers. Toronto has had a recent serial killer at work too, allegedly. But serial killers don't want to get caught. They want to keep on killing. Multiple murderers, according to Layton's analysis, either want to be shot in the process of their carnage, or they will take their own lives. As Elliot Layton says in this great book, the thing to remember is that there is no legitimate sort of reason for a mass shooting, for a multiple murderer to shoot into a crowd of people doing nothing. There's no legitimate excuse. There may be mental illness at work, there may be all sorts of other things we don't know at the moment, but none of it is an excuse. And then we have to grant that in a culture which glorifies violence, as ours does, we have to take responsibility, all of us, especially those of us probably in the media, because we report on it as we should. It's public information and people need to know, but there's a way to do it and a way not to do it. Anyway, this is what he says about that. If we insist upon the right to understand the dark forces that propel a person into launching a war upon the innocent, we must also assume the responsibility of recognizing the unholiness of his acts and the tragedies that he perpetrates. A cultural system that does otherwise, as does our own, is guilty of much more than misplaced tenderness. It must be charged with encouraging the repetition of such acts. The real reason I look to this book is because, especially in the early hours after one of these terrible episodes, where people lie dead and are in hospital, from a public place, is that there's no sense to be made of it. There's no easy answer. This isn't, by any means the loss of Toronto's innocence or the loss of Canada's innocence. That happened decades ago, when gunplay became normal. When I first started writing as a reporter in Toronto, when over the police radios we'd hear shots fired, reporters would actually go to the location where shots were fired. That's how rare it was. And that was a long time ago. Nobody goes. Sometimes even the police don't go when shots are fired. So we live in a different world, and we all have to sort of shoulder our share of responsibility for creating it, I suppose. And really, I think that all you can do in the wake of one of these episodes, until we know more about who the shooter was and what his alleged motivation might have been. There is never a legitimate excuse to mow down people in a public place. That's Leighton's starting point, and it should be ours.